I'm Dom Nicholls, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, as Ukraine strikes again inside occupied Crimea and in the Russian Black Sea port of Novorossisk, we report how Moscow appears to be massing forces in the north and east. We report how Donald Trump has set another 2-week deadline to know whether Putin is serious about peace. And later, Francis talks to Colonel Kevin Jackson, Chief of Staff of the US Army 5th Corps, a regular corps headquartered in Poland. They discuss the unit's presence in Europe and the perceived threat level from Russia.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody is going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Friday, the 22nd of August, 3 years and 181 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today I'm joined by Svitlana Morenets of The Spectator. But first, the latest from the front lines. Let's go inside Ukraine. There's been next to no movement on the front. However, according to Deep State and a few other sources I've been looking at, Russia seems to have moved a number of combat units into forward positions, which could indicate imminent offensive action. Now, they seem to have taken these units from elsewhere in Ukraine, possibly inside Russia as well. So it doesn't look like they've been able to deploy any kind of big operational reserve. But this indication, plus another day yesterday of comparatively low Russian casualties, 790 reported by the Ukrainian Defence Ministry, which, as I said, the British MOD says is a reasonably reliable source of information. And again, that 790 is obviously well down on recent weeks. That indicates that Russia seems to have been preserving combat power, possibly for a renewed offensive. So if their casualty figures are down, they've not been progressing on the front, I would assess that as being that they've been holding people back for something. Now, that might be what is about to happen. They've not pushed any more over the border into Sumy region. They've not advanced anywhere in particular, as say in the north or the east of the country. Very, very minor gains yesterday, actually lower than in recent weeks. So perhaps they are amassing forces. Now, they seem to be amassing combat power in the following areas. So on the Russian side of the border, in the area to the north of Sumy city, the area just north of Kupiansk, that's further to the east in Kharkiv Oblast, to the northeast of Liman, all around the Konstantinivka salient, so from the sort of northeast through east to southwest, and also northeast of Pokrovsk in that area at the base of the push north towards Dobropia. That prong north into Dobropia has not advanced, but equally not been totally fought back by Ukraine. That's still in existence. They've also pushed forces forward to the contact line running basically southwest from Pokrovsk, extending as far as Zaporizhia Oblast. So they do seem to be moving troops into position. Now, the Sumy axis is particularly interesting, I think. Putin yesterday sacked the northern group of forces and Leningrad military district commander General Alexander Lapin and replaced him with his deputy, who's doubling up as the chief of staff of the Russian ground forces, Colonel General Yevgeny Nikiforov. Now, that grouping, the northern group of forces, is responsible for attacking into Sumy, also responsible for the defence of Kursk. And it was in that area that Lapin got a lot of criticism, particularly from the Russian Milblog community. Putin seems to have stuck by him, but maybe this is a sort of face-saving way of sacking him. So leave it a few months and then replace him with his deputy. Now, Russia's MOD posted video footage yesterday of Nikiforov briefing Russia's Defence Minister Andrei Belousov. That confirms the Milblogger claims that Lapin had been replaced a couple of weeks ago. As I say, Nikiforov was Lapin's deputy for at least the last year. He was pushed in there as deputy after Ukraine's incursion into Kursk Oblast. So he's been there for a year. So it's not suggesting that he's any kind of amazing tactical commander, because that we might have seen something in the last year. But I just note that because there's also this movement of forces in the north and the east, as I suggested. So yesterday, across the rest of Ukraine, 55 drones fired by Russia, 46 brought down by air defence. Now, that figure, we relay it each day because it's basically easier to count and report accurately, but it doesn't include any FPV, first-person view drone attacks along or inside Ukraine. It's very difficult to tell if they've gone and come back. So if you don't see them, it's difficult to report unless they actually detonate. Also, very difficult to give an accurate figure on glide bomb strikes, but they are also going up and down the line, as is tubed artillery. Across the country, 2 civilians killed yesterday, dozens injured. Just to zoom in on one area, in Kherson Oblast, Russian forces were said to have targeted 31 settlements, including the regional centre of Kherson yesterday. 1 person killed, 17 others injured. This comes from Governor Alexander Prokudin. There is more footage you will find on social media of the so-called drone safari, the senseless but targeted attacks on civilians. In this case, I saw imagery of a Russian drone that obviously saw a man fixing tiles on his roof and then diverted, went over to him and dropped an explosive munition. I don't think the individual was killed. He was clearly injured and somebody else managed to drag him into the house. But again, senseless, a breach of humanitarian law, attacks on civilians. We've tried to report it when we can, but it's been going on for, well over a year now, I think. Now, inside Russia, and Ombre Intelligence, the global maritime risk management firm, says that a Ukrainian, well, as they say, unmanned surface vehicle, maritime drone, you and I, exploded and killed 5 Russian Naval Special Forces personnel in Novorossisk. That's on Russia's Black Sea coast. The HUR, the Military Intelligence Department, said that the drone had been disabled whilst attacking Novorossisk, disabled by electronic warfare, left it drifting in the bay. They say Russian forces then dispatched 5 personnel from the rather nattily titled Combat Against Underwater Incursion Forces and Devices. I mean, literally, it says what it does on the tin. These are naval special forces. They were dispatched to recover the drone, and then during that recovery operation, it detonated, reportedly killing all 5. Now, Ombre Intelligence says they are aware of these pressure-triggered drones used by Ukrainian forces carry up payloads up to 350 kilograms, so that is a very sizable device. They say an encounter between a merchant vessel and one of these things that are adrift could result in extensive damage. They say based on AIS data, the automated information system, the sort of bleep, the ping that shows where the ships are, so you don't bump into them. Ombre says there are 37 merchant vessels in Novorossisk port at the time of this incident, but they do know that a number of vessels turn their AIS off because they don't want people to know where they are. So it's difficult to tell. Now, inside occupied Crimea yesterday, another Ukrainian drone strike. Ukraine's Navy said this morning they'd hit a Russian drone base in occupied Sevastopol, from which Russia uses drones to monitor surface activity out into the Black Sea. And then one looking wider outside the country, oil supplies to Hungary and Slovakia could be suspended for at least 5 days, the country's foreign ministers have said this morning. Now, both countries have called on the European Commission to guarantee security of supplies. Foreign Ministers Peter Szijjarto and Juris Blana said in a joint letter, the physical and geographical reality is that without this pipeline, the safe supply of our countries is simply not possible. You'll remember this comes after Ukraine hit the Druzhba pipeline earlier this week that carries oil to Hungary and Slovakia. Slovakia, a commentator on a podcast near you, erroneously called Slovenia the other day. Gross error of judgment. So apologies for that. A couple more on the diplomatic front. In the latest reboot of Groundhog Day, Donald Trump has said that he will know within, you got it, 2 weeks, whether there will be peace in Ukraine. So speaking on the Todd Starnes show, that's a conservative talk radio program in the US, he was asked about achieving peace in the war, and he said, well, I will let you know about, I would say, within 2 weeks. We are going to know one way or the other. After that, we'll have to maybe take a different tack, but we will see. We will know pretty soon. Okay, fair enough. However, if you can't wait 2 weeks, or if you think you may already know the answer and feel perhaps that nothing's actually going to happen in a fortnight, the EU's top diplomat has tried to keep the diplomatic momentum going on Russia. Kaja Kallas said this morning that Putin is laying a trap over the prospect of Ukrainian land concessions as part of any so-called peace negotiations. The former Prime Minister of Estonia and part-time Dearnley dream interrupter told the BBC's Today programme a few hours ago that handing Ukrainian territory to Russia was, quote, a trap that Putin wants us to walk into. She said the strongest security guarantee is a strong Ukrainian army. Putin is just laughing, not stopping the killing, but increasing the killing. We are forgetting that Russia has not made one single concession. That phrase, stop the killing, as I said the other day, that seems to be accepted as the meme that is getting through to Donald Trump. So you'll hear stop the killing, stopping the killing, they are not stopping killing, etc., etc. You'll hear that a lot on the diplomatic circuit. Now then, staying briefly with Donald Trump, he suggested that it would be, quote, impossible for Ukraine to win the war without attacking Russia in a particularly ambiguous social media post yesterday. He criticised his predecessor, Joe Biden, for not granting Kyiv permission to fight back, in his words, and then accompanied by a picture of himself poking a clearly amused Vladimir Putin in the chest, echoing that famous 1959 photo of the then Vice President Richard Nixon doing the same to Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Mr. Trump wrote on Truth Social, "It is very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invader's country. It's like a great team in sports that has a fantastic defence but is not allowed to play offence. There is no chance of winning. It is like that with Ukraine and Russia. Crooked and grossly incompetent Joe Biden would not let Ukraine fight back, only defend. How did that work out?" So, that's being interpreted as, he's going to allow... God knows what it means, to be perfectly honest. Anyway, finally, a story from our correspondent, James Rothwell, Berlin correspondent. He says that Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz's hints that Germany may be involved in the coalition of the willing has come under fire from one of his top party allies. So Michael Kretschmer, who's the centre-right CDU party's state prime minister in Saxony, said that a German military deployment to Ukraine must not be a topic for us. In an interview with Spiegel magazine, he said the Bundeswehr, that's the German armed forces, the Bundeswehr lacks the prerequisites for that. You should only act as strong as you are. Now, many politicians, even in Mr. Merz's relatively hawkish CDU, are still uncomfortable with the idea of Germany having a very strong army, which, on top of that, many analysts say has suffered from decades of underinvestment. So we've reported that before, the internal pressures. We've noted how German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius has absolutely ruled out the gifting of terrorist missiles. So Mr. Merz obviously has some internal issues there. Now, Svitlana, welcome back. Delighted to have you back on the podcast. It's been an absolute whirlwind since, crikey, the last time we spoke, it's just gone all over the place. I'm particularly interested in your analysis of what happened last week in Alaska, interested in your analysis of where you think the idea of the coalition of the willing and European unity is going now, and what you're hearing from friends, colleagues, and the Ukrainian press about the state of the war at the moment. Svitlana, welcome back.
Thank you. I guess I will start with the mood in Ukraine, especially before Alaska. It felt apocalyptic because there was a feeling that Trump was going to sell Ukraine down the river, that Zelensky is going to come, the February clash is going to repeat, and Trump will be forcing Zelensky to sign a peace deal with Putin, whatever that deal means. And it was quite interesting to see, for example, Sevgil Musaeva. She's the editor of the Ukrainian Pravda, one of the most influential independent media in Ukraine. And she wrote a blog right before the Trump and Zelensky meeting in Washington. And she said that Ukrainians are being forced to accept deal as if we lost the war, but we didn't. We didn't win, but we didn't lose either. And she said that Ukrainians should remain strong, and no matter how that meeting ends, the fight for Ukraine's sovereignty and independence will continue. So it was quite a sobering piece, and you could feel the mood that everyone was really terrified about what was going to happen in Washington. Especially after Trump's meeting with Putin in Alaska, when he rolled out a red carpet for him, was applauding to him, and Ukrainians expected at least there will be a partial ceasefire, for example, no airstrikes on Ukraine, but Trump even couldn't reach that. And he made a really big concession that he agreed to hold the negotiations without ceasefire in place. And since that meeting in Alaska, 34 Ukrainian civilians have been killed in Ukraine, and almost 200 have been injured. So Trump didn't stop the killing as he promised, unfortunately. As for the meeting in Washington, I think the good news for Ukraine are that Trump said out loud that the US will take part in the security guarantees for Ukraine. It's unclear what their role will be. Probably it will be very minimal. But I think it will push many of the European allies to be more brave about security guarantees, knowing that America will be protecting their back if something happens. It is still quite a topic for jokes in Ukraine, this coalition of the willing. Sometimes we call it the coalition of the unwilling. I wouldn't want to offend any of the European leaders. Of course, they are trying their best, but it seems that from all of the proposals that Europeans are afraid to put boots on the ground close to the front line. They are talking only about Western Ukraine, somewhere in Lviv, to train Ukrainian soldiers, but this won't work as a deterrent to Russia. Of course, if the sky will be closed over Ukraine, Ukrainian civilians will feel safer, the international flights will be resumed. But the goal of this coalition is to stop Russia from attacking again, because it's the biggest fear that Ukrainians have. In my many trips to the front line, every soldier that I talked to said, after this war ends, there will be another in a couple of years. And everybody was convinced of that. And many were preferred to fight on rather than to stop now and let Russia regroup and attack again. So I think Trump and European allies will need to really convince Ukrainians that those security guarantees will work, because otherwise Zelensky won't sign any agreement with Putin.
I have to say, I'm particularly nervous of this word guarantee at the moment. It's doing a lot of heavy lifting in the diplomatic space right now. You've got the quote-unquote coalition of the willing trying to provide a security guarantee to Ukraine, whilst also looking over its shoulder at America to give a guarantee that it's there to back up the coalition of the willing. It's all a little bit shaky. I am very, very nervous about what this may or may not mean. We're not going to be able to answer it now, but the view inside Ukraine from people you speak to, your friends and contacts, what did they expect out of Alaska and then Monday night in the White House? And did they get what they expected?
I think from Alaska, Ukrainians expected a ceasefire. If you talk about good expectations, and it didn't materialize, unfortunately. If from talks in Washington, they just expected the talks not to collapse and that Zelensky and Trump not start fighting again. And I think that when Trump said about the security guarantees, it was quite a relief for Ukrainians. There was a little win for Ukrainians. But nothing else substantial was agreed there. The meeting between Putin and Zelensky that Trump said is going to happen in the coming weeks. It doesn't look like it will. If you listen to all the statements from the Kremlin, from Lavrov, all he says that Putin agreed to increase the level of the delegations, but not the meeting between the two leaders. And he repeated that today, that all the technical details of the agreement have to be agreed before, and only then Putin will meet Zelensky. So it looks like Putin is just stalling, and he's not going to come to the meeting until Trump decides to pressure him, and it doesn't look like in the moment, and we have to wait another 2 weeks to see what happens.
Just finally, so yesterday there was a strike in the far, far, far southwest of the country, beyond the Carpathian Mountains, in the oblast that I said at the time, I don't think there's a curfew on there. I think it's so far removed from the war that they've decided not to have a curfew there. They certainly didn't last winter, because I know people from Ukrainian Action, actually, who run a rehabilitation centre there. So I think, regardless, it is very, very far away. And the thing that was hit was an electronics firm that's essentially backed by US investment. Now, that was being interpreted as a thumb to the nose, Putin against Trump. They don't just happen by accident. What was your interpretation of that particular site, that region that very rarely gets attacked, and that particular site being hit yesterday so soon after all the diplomatic activity?
Really targeted precisely, and I think just Putin is making fun of Trump, and also it's made for the Russian internal audience to show that Putin has an upper hand over Trump. Because what Trump did in Alaska is he took Putin out of the international isolation, and he presented him as an equal leader to Trump, and now Putin is showing that he is even higher than Trump, that he rules and controls the negotiations. And the Ukrainians, they would expect Trump to react to that, but I think his post yesterday about that Ukraine was not allowed to win because it was only on defensive. It is Joe Biden's fault. I think it was a reaction to that attack, but it is so weak reaction for the most powerful and influential leader in the world. I think Trump really is the only person who can end this war. He's just choosing the wrong strategy to do it by appeasing Putin and trying to offer him everything good, the trade, everything he can imagine just for him to stop the war. But it's not going to work like that.
Interesting. You see that post on Truth Social as a response to the attack on an American.
Yes, I think it was a response because very rarely Trump writes something good or truthful about Ukraine, if I say it like that. And in that post, I agreed with every word that he said there because Ukraine really was given mostly the defensive weapons and too few. And that's one of the reasons why the counteroffensive in 2023 collapsed. So I think it was correct there. And some Ukrainians even tried to think, oh, maybe Trump will give Ukraine more weapons or he will do something that Ukraine is going to strike Moscow or something. But again, I think nothing will happen.
While on his trip to Germany, Francis spoke to Colonel Kevin Jackson, Chief of Staff of the US Army 5th Corps, a regular corps headquartered in Poland. A historic unit with a distinguished record of service across multiple theatres over the past century, they discuss their presence in Europe and the perceived threat level from Russia. This is their conversation.
First of all, if you could just briefly summarise 5th Corps. Historians listening to this may be familiar with its involvement in D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge, I think I'm right in saying, but it's been resurrected post-2013 and the threats in the European theatre. But interested in your perspective and the involvement of 5th Corps here in Europe.
Yeah, 5th Corps has a historical story past basically in Europe. Not only part of World War I, World War II, 5th Corps was the main force on D-Day. When you look at operations on the beach and a lot of the story units that fell under 5th Corps. And so that's something that we really want to get our story out. And so you'll see 5th Corps participating in a lot of the D-Day activities. Then part of the Cold War as well. 5th Corps has been around in Europe as part of the Cold War. Used to be headquartered at Heidelberg, Germany. After the Cold War, 5th Corps also participated in a lot of the other conflicts, which included the Iraqi War. 5th Corps was a part of that as well as a higher headquarters for several units. 5th Corps went away for a while, was inactivated, but around 2020, 5th Corps stood back up, was reactivated, and then 5th Corps deployed forward back to Europe as the invasion of Ukraine happened. And since then, 5th Corps has conducted operations to assure our allies and partners and to deter Russian aggression in Europe.
What form does that deterrence take? I mean, obviously presence is one of them, but interested in the kind of exercises and the integration with other NATO powers particularly.
So we look at the sure piece of it, sure allies. I think we do that in several ways. One, what you talked about presence of 5th Corps is in 23 different sites across 9 countries in Europe. And not only are we there, but we're training side by side at every level. So at the tactical level, from our squads and platoons to our companies and batteries, training with other nations' armies to increase their capacity and our ability to be interoperable, to work together in case conflict did break out. Then from a deterrence standpoint, the deterring Russian aggression by our presence, whether that's armored forces, light forces, in some of the key locations. So if you look at the eastern flank, the Latvias, Estonias, Bulgarias, 5th Corps troops are there and people know we're there, and we're sure that creates a deterrence. And part of this effort for 5th Corps is a global deterrence, as we've seen some of the activities with different nations working together. 5th Corps stands to increase global deterrence.
You mentioned Latvia, Lithuania, those countries that are often described as being potential targets one day. Can you just give your assessment of the threat level of that?
we're very conscious of the geography, right? If you go back history of land wars in Europe, and so we think we're at the right locations, and we think our presence there definitely creates that deterrence piece. And so as prudent warfighters, you continuously monitor the threat, and we make sure that you have the proper force protection, and we make sure that we work with our not only the armies but also the whole of government piece, right? From the CHODs to the territorial defense is one where we've focused a lot on recently to make sure that we understand host nation defense plans, that we integrate as part of not only the NATO land tactical plans, but we also integrate with the host nation and the armies to just increase the overall defense here in Europe.
You mentioned interoperability. Can you go into a little bit more detail of what forms that takes, perhaps specifically in operational scenarios?
Yeah, so interoperability described doctrine for the United States as human, procedural, and technical. We're working really on all three of them. Some of the various equipment that's being fielded, several nations here. So whether that's the Abrams, what we call our tank initiative, which can get to some of the technical and procedural with some of the equipment side they have. Human interoperability, we think we have that because we do a lot of things, not only at the core level, so the NATO cores like Multinational Corps Northeast or 2 Polish Corps, and several other corps, whether that's MSC Southeast in Romania, 1st German Netherlands Corps, in RDC Italy. We have relationships and work across all the various corps and the divisions as well. Our rotational division right now, which is 1st Armored Division, they also work with a lot of divisions that are across Europe as well. And so I think we have a pretty good relationship, and we're increasing interoperability by all the exercises. Today, as part of AUSA, our Commander General, Lieutenant General Costanza, he talked about exercise Avenger Triad, where we had 6 other NATO corps, and we were able to talk to them on a continuous basis and able to work through various scenarios to practice and rehearse in case things move from crisis to conflict.
Now, there's a prevailing narrative at the moment in Europe that the US is winding down its presence here. Is that something that you sense in your work?
We have thousands of troops and 23 forward operating sites across 9 countries, and they haven't gone anywhere. So in my mind, we're here, we're standing toe to toe with our partners. We're in those locations, we're on the eastern flank and all the key critical capabilities. So I think it's back to deterrence. We haven't gone anywhere. I don't listen to the other narrative because my job as a chief is to resource and make sure that all the soldiers in all those locations have what they need, and we haven't gone anywhere.
As you say, you're present in 9 countries. That's a lot of different languages, that's a lot of different technologies, there's a lot of different ways of working. How do you begin to navigate that just on a logistical level every day?
As the chief of the staff, that's one of my biggest challenges, but we would call it that echelon. We have great commanders, we have great leaders, NCOs, and officers across our formation. So part of trust, we have our troops in various locations, and we trust that they're going to cultivate relationships. They're going to take the guidance, commander's intent from the commanding general, and then they're going to execute as all good soldiers do, and to build relationships, to NATO C2 convergence, to build capacity, enable Ukraine to fight and win. We're just going to do all of those things because that's what our mission is, and that's what we're proud about as soldiers.
To enable Ukraine to fight and win, can you talk a little bit more about how you enable that?
Yeah, I think presence, being here from the training standpoint, some of the things that not necessarily 5th Corps has done, but logistically what the United States has done, I think all those things are a part of enabling Ukraine to fight and win, and we think about that every day to make sure that missions that are given the 5th Corps, that we uphold those missions and we do it with pride, because we think we understand, I think the leaders in Europe understand the significance of the time period that we're in right now, this largest fight product since World War II. And so 5th Corps is doing everything it can to enable Ukraine to fight and win.
And we've done a lot of work at the Telegraph in terms of being there and understanding some of the lessons from the joint exercises done between countries. I wonder if you could comment on some of the big takeaways of some of those exercises. I mean, obviously there's one part of it's just practice, but interested in for the future war, as it were, what kind of things do you take away?
So I personally have written a lot of articles about it, but the lessons learned are really key. And a lot of people talk about the changing nature of warfare. I think the biggest game changer is really the UAS, the use of one-way attack drones, FPVs, then the ability to defend. So not only from a UAS, but counter UAS, how vulnerable your potential formations could be. How do you stop mass and maneuver? You think about the density, the number of Russian brigades, divisions that are involved in this fight, the number of Ukrainian brigades that are involved in there. So for me, I think about the scale of the fight. I think about the lessons we learned. How would we fight this fight? What are the takeaways? Hiding in plain sight. How would you hide headquarters? How do you move munitions? Those things and some of the activities that we've seen play out over the last couple of years watching the Ukraine fight. So for Fifth Corps, we're a learning organization, and we're taking all those and incorporating those into our exercises of what things that the Corps could do better, and not just Fifth Corps, but the whole United States Army. And our adversaries too, or everybody is watching the Ukraine fight to see the changing of warfare and how they adapt their armies. And I think the key to success in the future is going to be who can adapt faster, who can take those lessons learned and go faster. And so this really ties into one of the Corps' lines of effort, which is our modernization and transformation line of effort. And so what Fifth Corps has been doing has been designated brigades as part of the Army's transformation and contact. So we've had several brigades go through so far, and we have other brigades going through coming up. Basically, they're testing equipment that once experimented with based on some of those lessons learned, and those lessons can be applied, it can be scaled, and equipment could be procured across the Army. So I think the lessons from Ukraine is really driving our Army to modernize. And Fifth Corps is the lead for the Army to test a lot of the equipment that we've been issued to withstand the conditions of Europe, to distances that you're talking about. Look at the Ukraine flood, or you look at the size of conflict, how large of areas are. And so Fifth Corps is leading in the transformation effort. We have several initiatives that we're doing to really modernize and really transform the Army.
You were talking about logistics there, and I remember a conversation that I had with my colleague David and with a senior US official, I better not say who, whilst I was in Washington. And he said that one of his major concerns was back then, and I'm sure that progress has been made with back then, was this idea that if war did erupt on Europe's eastern flank, that there hadn't really been enough thinking about how you would transport tanks, troops to the front line. You said literally purely in terms of aircraft, in terms of trains, in terms of vehicles. I just wonder, 2 years on from when that would have been at the end of 2023, is this something that's been discussed at high levels?
Yeah, I would say logistics is always a focus. If you look at my commander's top priorities is logistics and how do we set the logistical footprint across Europe. And that's in everything from all the different classes of supply. And so we have put a lot of effort into it. We have done a lot of studying what the resources are. We talked scale a few minutes ago. Well, we understand what that scale means, right? When we look at things like number of munitions the Ukrainians and the Russians are utilized on a daily basis. What does that mean for what you have to have? So we've looked at it hard, and we have continued to make improvements over the last couple of years so that we can respond if required.
We started with history, and I wanted to, as we're sort of winding up, to return to it. When you look at the historical previous operations of Fifth Corps, what lessons do you take? What perhaps battles do you reflect on in terms of lessons and implications for the future conflict, as it were?
Yeah, no, it's funny because the one thing I'm working on back at Fort Knox is a heritage room. And so one thing that we've done is we've looked at what we think are the most important periods in Fifth Corps history. So we talked about some of them, D-Day, we talk about the Cold War periods. And so what I tell the staff of 600 is that this is a historical moment that we're currently operating in, and the things that we are doing matter, because I believe history will look back at this time period and say, wow, Fifth Corps was there with thousands of troops in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, all the forward operating side in Poland, and 5th Corps was there partnered with all these NATO corps, and I think history will remember that as part of this conflict. Now, we want, like I said, to enable Ukraine to fight and win, and I think when you look at 5th Corps' contribution from a historical standpoint, training thousands of Ukrainians, training NATO corps, war-fighting symposium, Polish Patchy Initiative, European HIMARS Initiative, battle group expansion. When you look at the list of what 5th Corps will have done in this period, oh man, I feel great about it. I feel that the Corps has done everything, and I think history will look back and recognize 5th Corps for the things that they've done as part of that.
Well, I think I speak for many when I say please don't leave. But one final question to you, which is, I've put my questions to you, but is there anything that we've not talked about that is on your sort of radar that perhaps should be on ours, but that you rarely get asked?
I would just say 5th Corps, we are all soldiers as part of the United States Army, and my boss really focuses on the assure and deter piece, right? The why we are here, right? Yes, we also maintain U.S. training and readiness, and we're a more lethal force by being here, right? All our companies conducting company live fires, and so not only are we assuring and deterring, but we're bringing back to our Army better trained forces when they leave Europe. And so I think it's really key that we do that for our Army, and then this is my second time in Europe, so I'll have about 6 years in Europe in my career, and seeing what I see over the last 3 years is that the capacity and how things that we do, the end state and the output, right? We're building better forces that we're partnered with. We're increasing our ability to operate together. We're having better exercises, and we're creating stronger deterrence, not just from the U.S. forces, but also our NATO forces. That's what I'm proud about.
Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Francis and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons, to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Francis Dearnley, Louisa Wells and David Nicholls.
My name is David Nicholls. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.